It's 5 to 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb.
Well, hello, it's Keith and Nick from Islands at War. Just say goodbye to Jim there. How you doing, Nick?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. And you?
Yeah, not so bad. And we're January 1943, and we feel like December 1942 that we've got enough for 2 programs, Nick.
Yep.
And when we did the December issue, the episode, we didn't really have much Christmas cheer in there. There wasn't a lot going around, but we found that some of our diarists seem to make merry over the New Year period. But first of all, Nick, you've got a recipe for Christmas pudding.
Yeah, I'd totally forgotten that I had this, actually. And it's from the Guernsey Press, and it was one of our regular diaries that we refer to, Reverend Ord. It was from his wife, actually. She'd written in just before Christmas how to make a Christmas pudding without eggs, and went on to give a recipe. It's not quite a standard Christmas pudding, I don't think. I'm no expert on making one, but it involves using 1/4 pound of raisins, 1/4 pound of currants, 1/4 pound of potatoes, 1 pound of flour, and 1/4 pound of carrots. And then you've got a bit of suet in there. And then you've got to add nutmeg if you can get any, and 2 ounces of lemon peel. Mix it all together with milk and steam for 2.5 hours. Well, good luck with having enough fuel to actually be able to do that. But
Well, of course, that's a very good point. It's all very well coming up with these necessity is the mother of invention recipes, but good point. Yeah, you've got to be able to make sure that you've got a supply of fuel to actually get the thing done.
Well, that's the thing, because in January 43, one of the things I noticed when I was doing some prep, and particularly looking at the old Guernsey presses from January 43 and from December, was that they've been pretty much reduced to where greenhouses have been pulled down, because the Germans in some cases made people pull down greenhouses. They were either pulled down and reassembled if they were in quite good condition. So they were advertised for sale, basically a bit like today on Facebook or whatever, buyer to take away sort of thing. If they were in good condition, then people would take them away potentially and reassemble them on another field or whatever to use them as a greenhouse, or they'd end up as firewood. The only problem is, of course, painted timber of poor quality, because it's a bit rotten, doesn't burn very well. Well, it burns, but it doesn't last for very long.
I think there's a lot of lead in the paint in those days.
Yeah,
as well.
It can't have been very good for you, but
No.
there are numerous people that talk about they've managed to keep a fire going using that, but it's proving quite expensive to do it that way. And of course, the problem is you're not allowed to chop down. You can't go around chopping down bits of tree, even if it's on your own land. Not allowed.
No, I certainly suspect that people in the higher parishes that own land, trees that weren't that visible, but would have had access to that. But really, the townies, they were the ones, of course, that felt the brunt of all this.
Yeah,
they?
I mean, there were quite a few that talked about how fortunate the fact that the weather was so horrible in December, because bits of tree blew off. So you could probably get away with nicking
Pushing the odd thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I saw one account as well where a lady woke up wondering what the noise was. She lived up near the airport, kept one morning wondering what on earth the noise was. It was actually a farmer who was her neighbour, was basically tipping logs out that he'd chopped up over her wall.
For her?
Yeah, very first thing in the morning before curfew had finished.
Well, nice little Christmas present. Now, that was Reverend Ord with the recipe, and regular diarist now, Louis Guillemette. Just a reminder that Louis was the sort of civil servant liaison between German Field Kommandantur and our truncated government, the controlling committee. But him and his wife Queenie had just had a baby, Josie, who's still with us. If you're listening, Josie, you're continuing to be on the mend. They had a really good sort of group of friends, and they obviously it's the party season, but they made a lot of arrangements around curfew and either stayed in houses overnight or had some sort of elaborate way of getting home. And you're going to tell us a little bit about their parties here. They were really quite elaborate and sophisticated in many ways, weren't they?
Well, for some people, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a social class issue comes in here as well.
Very much so. After a bit of wrangling, they managed to go to a place called Sunnycroft in the Grange. When they got there was a room full of their friends, and they were given vouchers for 5 drinks apiece, which is a lot, actually, at that time. Of course, it's not very strong. The beer would have been very weak. They weren't going to end up, smashed. But of course, they had to stay the whole night. But it sounds like they had quite good fun. I love this description. 2 of the performers, because they cleared a dance floor and had a bit of a dance going on, and 2 of the performers were erstwhile dignified doctors. Now, they're quite interesting characters, actually. It's 2 doctors who were actually partners in the same doctor's practice, and that's Dr. Richard Sutcliffe, who if anybody wants to read about him, I've written about him on the blog, so if you go to Island Fortress, there's his story is on there, and Dr. Rose, his partner, and they were playing instruments here, ukulele, and it doesn't say what the other one is, but they were entertaining people, and then from somewhere, they had got a cine projector, and they had a talkie cine film. That was their surprise of the evening, a George Formby talkie film for an hour and a half.
Crumbs, that really is...
So that doesn't surprise me too much, because Dr. Sutcliffe actually was a film buff. He was very keen on taking amateur film himself, and in fact, when we get to May 1945, you'll find out what he did on May 1945, which is quite an interesting story, and actually quite dangerous. But we'll save that for May 1945.
Yeah. An hour and a half of George Formby, I'd need more than 5 drinks, I think.
Yeah, I think I'd be asleep. But I suppose the novelty, to be honest, if it's that, we'll go and watch the German cinema, which were generally either not very funny comedies or just very dark and horrible films, or propaganda.
Yeah, I think
you're going to take that anyway.
Yeah, I think we'll go with the George Formby.
Yeah. So, and then they played charades. So, and then 5:30 in the morning, they're on sardines. I'd have been asleep.
Yeah, I mean, they had. I was going to say to you, their stamina at partying was really quite incredible, given the fact that they were low on calories, probably low on alcohol, and they just kept going. I mean, it just they probably wouldn't have done it in peacetime. This is the thing. It's almost
exactly.
like, we'll party because
we're not allowed to.
Because Well,
they did get up to a few things like singing the national anthem, and things like that. And so,
and film projectors would that have been a sort of thing that you should have given in?
No, I don't. You'd have been all right with a projector.
It's not a recorder.
Yeah, cameras got confiscated, so they'd been confiscated, and also we'll get to a bit later on. But there was in January 43. The most enormous amount of orders were issued. Goes on and on and on. So we'll get that at some point, either in this episode or another one. And you're banned from sketching outdoors.
Oh, God, yeah. And of course, you might get shot as well.
Yes, funnily enough, in serious cases of sketching,
you're going to get shot.
Going to get shot. Otherwise, it's hard labour.
Yeah. Okay, so that's party season over. So we're well and truly now into the grind of January 1943. And there's a lot of shipping incidents, Nick. There was a steamer, SS Schokland, which was a requisitioned Dutch vessel, and it was en route from Jersey, from the islands, from Jersey, and it was wrecked off Noirmont. If we deal with that one, Louis Guillemot has heard about this. He reports over 180 people have lost their lives. Also, if that is true, it's a really, really disastrous wreck. Now, Noirmont is off Jersey.
Yeah.
Aspects of what Louis Guillemot is hearing, did this turn out to be accurate? I mean, what's the true story behind this vessel going down?
Yeah, so it's reasonably accurate. The numbers aren't quite there, but I mean, it's quite ironic. The name of the boat is the Schokland, because frankly, with the boats in January 43, the Germans had a bit of a shocker. The Schokland itself was a cargo ship. It was carrying sacks of cement, iron girders, and 284 troops who were returning from leave. And it sank on the 5th of January 43 when it hit a reef about a mile off the coast of Jersey, off of Portlet and normal, and 106 of the troops who were being transported in the hold.
So this would have been visible had it been daylight. What time of day was it?
I'm not sure, actually.
I think it was...
It was probably night. Because
I think it was, yeah.
It was probably night because they'd already discovered it was pretty risky. As we found out in December 42, pretty risky trying to move your boats around during the day. Now, apart from the soldiers, the Germans denied that there were ladies of the night on board.
Ah, right.
However, since then, divers have found perfume bottles, stilettos, etc. So unless those troops returning from Germany, where they wouldn't have been able to obtain those very easily in any case, were bringing those back with them, I'd say that they probably were. I mean, Lesotho talks about it and says, it's not a very auspicious start to the year for their guardians.
Nice choice of words, yeah.
And, being ultra nervous because of being attacked. The previous convoys were being attacked by the RAF. The Schokland struck a rock and sank immediately.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about this is Guillemette refers to a chap called a German propaganda journalist for Guernsey, Herr Goetman.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce that?
Goetman, I think.
Goetman, yeah. He was aboard but survived after 3 hours in the water. He was presumably someone that handled all aspects of what we would call the media today.
Oh, he was
he was known to Guillemette quite. They knew one another quite well. Yeah.
I know lots of stories about him. He probably wish he'd drowned, to be honest with.
Oh, was it?
With what happens later on in the occupation.
Okay. So he's a name to sort of mentally store, though.
Yeah, we've talked about him briefly before.
Yeah, briefly. Yeah.
But he was basically the head censor. He had some sympathy towards the British. He'd been educated in England. I think it was either Oxford or Cambridge that he'd lived in. He'd gone to university in England and then had gone back to Germany. And surprise, surprise, not been allowed to go back to England ahead of the outbreak of war. So he is quite sympathetic, but he's also a bit of a rogue. So I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Right.
Right. But let's just say
we will encounter him again going forward.
We will encounter him again going forward because not only some of our diarists, but some other well-known people that we've already mentioned in previous podcast episodes are somewhat surprised in circumstances in which they meet him, shall we say.
Okay, yeah, got that. But also, that wasn't the only significant foundering at sea. There's this Xaver Dorsch, which is, it's a new one on me, sort of vaguely, but we're going to do a sort of deep dive into this now. What happened here, Nick?
Yeah, this one's quite an odd one because there is a book which was produced, I can't remember what year, but I think it was late 70s, early 80s by the Occupation Society about some of the shipping around here. And they record in that they don't have much about this boat and that it wasn't a regular on the supply run. It did make a couple of runs. I've found a whole load of other stuff that's come out since then, obviously with the benefit of archives being opened up and things like that.
Yeah.
We've been able to find more stuff. I'll caveat that with, what if you don't believe what you read on the internet? Because there are several sources on the internet which say that this boat was the freighter formerly known as Staffer. It wasn't.
Oh, right.
The Staffer had been sunk by now. We talked about the Staffer sinking up in Alderney. It had been sunk. It's not that boat. It looks completely different. And I've got the history of the boat. It's a completely different type of vessel. And this is, again, a very sad story. I mean, like the Staffer, it actually foundered up in Alderney, and it was, again, because it had broken the moorings. One of the things that they seemed to suffer with up there was that ships broke the moorings. In the Staffer's case, there was much suspicion that it was sabotage, and we talked about that at quite some length in earlier episodes, so I won't go over that again. But in the case of the Xaver Dorsch, unfortunately, it had sick Russian OT workers in the holds. It ran aground after breaking its moorings during a gale. Very unforgiving up round there if it's windy up in Alderney. And a number of the save workers died in the hold because they were left there for days. Absolutely awful. It was eventually pulled off the beach. It was sunk by bombing later in the war, but we'll talk about that when we get there. It was a boat called Caboteur originally, and it was originally laid down for Mr. S.F. Howe, a British citizen, for his company to use. But the Germans took over the Dutch shipyard and decided to rename her. And it was a small coaster. It was 50.8 meters long, about 513 tons. It couldn't go very quick, so I'd imagine it wouldn't have been very pleasant being on it going to Alderney, because I think it could go about 3 knots faster than the Alderney race. So it wouldn't have been very pleasant from that point of view. But it was used occasionally to transport materials. It wasn't a frequent visitor, but it transported materials from Cherbourg and St. Malo. And there's a chap who recounted, Albert, can't really pronounce their Pothugin, something like that. I'm not even sure what nationality he was, but he said that for 14 days the prisoners were kept in the holds without water or food in appalling conditions. Now, bearing in mind they were already sick, it wasn't going to end well. There were apparently, he says, 15 deaths, but I've not been able to record anything further on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is just breathtaking, this casual brutality to the nth degree, with these poor men, in a wreck of a ship for 14 days, already sick, and 15 dead people amongst them, if we can believe what we heard. And this is just hell on earth, isn't it? It's just staggering, and
now, curiously, in 1972, so they've left it from 1943 until 1972, the British owner, S.F. Howe, tried to claim damages for the loss of the ship from the French state. Quite why the French state, I don't know, but there we go. But the trial ended with the dismissal of the request. Now, this isn't quite the end of the Xaver Dorsch. As I said, it did get rescued, but not before the Germans had lost a 300-ton patrol boat, which was an ex-trawler, called the Henny Frick, which was lost when it ran aground in Alderney when they were trying to pull the Xaver Dorsch off the beach. So they lost that one. That one sank. It eventually was refloated, but the V703 was a complete loss. And just to make things even worse, they lost a Minesweeper as well. That one was silly enough to be out in daylight near St. Peter Port and was bombed by the Allies on the 29th of January.
So the Xaver Dorsch, is there any wreckage still sort of extant? Is it?
Yeah, it's not there. It's not near Alderney. It's off the coast of France, actually.
Well, then that's possibly
later
on.
Later on, it survives for just over another year.
Oh, okay. So this is perhaps why the guy felt if he went to the French authorities.
Possibly.
Okay. So I think does that sort of account for our shipping?
I think that covers our shipping. I can't be sure. I had a good look. I can't be sure which Allied Air Force sank the Minesweeper, because by this time the American Air Force were in the area as well. So they were active in the area, as we'll hear later on.
Okay, moving on. Louis Guillemet is acquainted with a certain Francois Grinard, a French supplier of gas and charcoal for the vehicles that we've mentioned, the buses, etc. So he's a French merchant, I guess, and he talks to Louis Guillemet about the French support for the British. And this is interesting because you'd have thought, well, of course, the French are supporting the British, but of course the Allied air activity over France now is constant. As you say, Nick, the United States Air Force is flying presumably raids and sorties as all part of a go at the German infrastructure in France. And so despite that, the French population is still very much for the Allies. But
he's kind of hedging his bets.
I think he was, because it seems that he has foreseen the advantages, as Louis Guillemet says, of keeping funds in a bank account in Guernsey. Now, why would he do that, Nick?
Yeah, he thinks that the Barclays are more likely to be able to pay him if he comes looking for his money at the end of the war than anywhere else.
So he's depositing money in Guernsey, in Barclays Bank?
Yeah, he is.
And is he depositing Reichsmarks?
No.
A listener, Davey, said, I've got to say Reichmarks, not Reichsmark.
Yeah. Now, this is just coming to the end of being able to use French francs, and he's actually depositing French francs with Barclays, which actually is, as far as the island authorities are concerned, the civilian authorities, is brilliant. Because one of the problems is we can't get our hands on French francs to use to buy goods from France.
Okay, so these French francs are deposited by a Frenchman in Guernsey, and then Barclays Guernsey can pay French francs out.
They're going to pay him in sterling.
Ah, okay.
So he banks it here and they convert it to sterling for him. Then that means they've got the actual notes that they can go and use.
They own the French francs.
Yes.
Barclays.
Yeah, because basically he's banking it. He wants sterling. He doesn't want anything
So he's
else.
using it as an exchange.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's not to say he probably hasn't got a stash of French francs somewhere else.
No, but he's got a stash of sterling somewhere, hasn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is what makes it even more sort of far-sighted on his part. But Barclays having French francs now, what would they be doing with the French francs?
Giving them to because we had to borrow from the banks. The government had to borrow from the banks.
So the state, the Guernsey state, has
now
have access on a loan basis
to French francs.
Yeah,
and that's how that works. Now, I said he's hedging his bets a bit because he's doing that, but he also says he still believes in Marshal Pétain and says that Laval is a true Frenchman. Yeah. And that even though he doesn't like the English, he likes the Germans even less.
Yeah.
So he's not saying he particularly likes us.
So he's a sort of a fascist light, I think.
And he's a bit of a I don't know.
He's a businessman.
A fascist wheeler dealer, Arthur Daly stroke.
Oh yeah,
that's
super spiv.
Yeah, exactly. And, he probably wasn't coming to the Channel Islands for much longer after this, to be fair, because things were getting tough.
Yeah.
And he'd be out of luck selling charcoal for the buses come later on in 43 anyway, because they have to cut the bus service right back.
Yeah. So would he have been under any form of watch by the Germans? Surely they would have he'd have been on a some sort of list where because he's a potential spy, really.
Yeah,
isn't he?
he'll have a permit, and it's back to what we talked about in December 42 about he would have had to be registered wherever he was staying.
Yeah,
they'd have to take his papers and show them to the Germans. So it's not going to be an easy ride doing this.
He's the sort of guy they would like to know where he is and what he's doing. That would be okay.
And at the same time they were contemplating locking up some of the guys that were doing the purchasing in France for us. So George Vaudin was implicated in wasn't implicated in anything. The Germans just took umbrage. I think he upset them one time too many because the Germans were mucking him about. It's that case of you end up with a black mark against your name, and if they haven't got anything to pin on you right at that moment, they'll be keeping an eye on you for later on.
Okay, now I think we said at the top of this episode that we've got a lot of material for January 1943, and January 1943 is a lead up to further deportation. So I think, Nick, what we'll do is we'll wrap up some of the smaller items before we go into the rumours of deportations and how they start to crystallise. And so what I want to pick up on this is some of and we mentioned the doctors before, typhus. Louis Guillemette meets with local doctors, Simmons and Revel, plus a German doctor, to discuss a possible outbreak of typhus amongst organisation toad workers. And of course, what they're worrying about is its transmission. Was this real and present danger?
Yeah, it was. They had outbreaks around Cornet Street. Was a particular area of town there. We touched on in previous episodes about the conditions these guys were kept in.
Yeah, and of course the transmission would be the worry about transmissions. It leaks into the civil population.
Yeah, that's what they're worried about.
And presumably there just isn't the meds anyway to deal with it if it happens.
Yeah, they had some of them locked up in Castle Cornet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they had some of them. They kept them there just out of the way. But Cornet Street and Pedvin Street were sealed off for about a couple of weeks. And as we've mentioned before, these guys, these were paid workers. These weren't slave.
They're not slave workers.
These weren't slave workers. They were paid, but they'd come from all over France, Algeria, etc. And they had nominally volunteered at these sort of quasi job centres. The French and German government were saying, if if you get so many volunteers, we'll release so many French prisoners of war, etc. They didn't. Shocker, they didn't keep to the deal.
No.
It turned out, I can't remember what it was supposed to be. I think it was 1 for 10, and it turned out to be 1 for every 100, roughly. So they didn't really keep to the deal. But these guys, when they found themselves here, they were put up in houses that had basically no furniture. They were sleeping on straw mattresses, where they got to change the straw about once every few weeks. There was very poor sanitary conditions, if any. They weren't allowed to light the fire, because that would result in you getting a beating, because obviously you're going to get smoke coming out the chimney. So they were freezing cold. They were in horrible conditions, and unsurprisingly, typhus broke out.
Yeah, I mean that time, and as a sort of legacy of the 19th century, Cornet Street and Pedvin Street, as mentioned by Nick, they're not the most salubrious parts of St. Peter Port. Then poor area. My family came from Pedvin Street. And so it was.
So did some of mine, actually.
Yeah,
yeah. Some of mine were born and lived in Pedvin Street before the war.
It's not far from Hopeville, where Victor Hugo had a house, but it was. They corralled a lot of these people into a very small area. So it was only natural that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the Frenchmen that I've read an account of, the house had been stripped bare. Basically, there was not a stick of furniture in it. That, everything had been taken away. The Germans had pretty much trashed the place and then moved out, as happened quite often. They trashed buildings and then moved on, including the Duke of Richmond Hotel.
Yeah, they would pull the floorboards up and then set light to the floorboards.
And all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. So what had been perfectly usable houses previously were now no longer...
Shells, really.
They were not... So they moved out of the area, but they shoved all these guys in here. They weren't allowed to have a shower. After this typhus outbreak, one of the doctors that they brought over, a German doctor who was some sort of expert in the transmission of disease, etc., who was absolutely mortified when he saw the conditions that these guys were being made to live in. Well, I'm not sure if he saw the conditions. When he found out the conditions that they were in, I don't think he was doing a house visit to go and see how they were getting on with their typhus. And he came up with a list of things that they had to do. So this French tote worker actually said, at least we were allowed to have a shower once a week after this. I mean, I can imagine it would have been a cold one. And
hardly any soap, of course.
Yeah, exactly. That was a problem as well. So hygiene was just a problem for everybody anyway. But what they didn't want was anybody getting this in the civilian population and then it breaking out massively throughout.
Yeah, well, people had depressed immune systems, didn't they? And it would have just
it would have been bad enough. Yeah.
Again, it's just this casual brutality, casual disregard for human life. It's just staggering, and it's just embedded by 1943. Yeah. Okay, something my father talked about when he was still with us. The teaching of German in schools. The Feldkommandantur in Guernsey sends a letter to the controlling committee. So this is our government here in Guernsey, effectively ordering the teaching of the German language in schools. Now, this is in contravention of the English interpretation of the Hague Convention. And when Guillemette talks about this to the Germans, they say, well, it's already in practice, in operation in Jersey. Is that correct, Nick?
Yeah, it was up and running in Jersey already, yeah. Lesotho was a little bit surprised that this hadn't happened before, as he was about other things as well. As I say, there was huge lots of orders that came out in January 43. They had a bit of a, I don't know what you describe it as. I mean, there's one day when there's something like 27 orders in the paper.
Flurry.
Yeah.
A flurry of orders. A blizzard of orders.
I mean, it gives you any feel for it, I looked at a list of the orders, and I'm not even sure if that list is complete, but it had like 823 throughout the occupation.
Is this because...
And some of those orders ran for page, there'd be like a page and a half for the Guernsey Press.
Are they sort of cut and pasting things that would have been issued in France?
Oh, yeah.
And it's sort of, it seems bizarre and illogical to apply them in the islands, but really it's just a cut and paste job from occupied territories.
Oh, yeah. It was coming from the French command. Some of them were actually even delivered in in French. You get the actual order itself that was ordered to be published was in French and German, and was then translated into.
It'd have been easier to have a list of things you could do, really.
Yeah, pretty much. That's kind of how Lesotho is feeling. There's a whole load of people, when you read their diaries or you find other accounts that have been given where, they've post-war they've given an interview. January 43, they were all pretty depressed, and just the piling on of lots and lots of orders doesn't help. I mean, some of them were just completely ludicrous, because it was like an order saying that you weren't allowed to train wireless operators. Well, not really likely to be happening in the Channel Islands.
No.
Certainly not by January 1943, even if you had a radio that you could use, to be transmitting. So yeah, they did insist on German being taught from January 43.
And do we know why it's in contravention of the English interpretation of the Hague Convention?
I don't think you're allowed to make people speak your language if you're the occupier. I've not looked at the Hague Convention, but I'm fairly certain that's all it is just. So you can't. It'd be it's like the Russians going into Ukraine, and it's just thinking people who don't speak Russian as their first language start speaking Russian.
Yeah, I mean, so it's mandatory in school. But I seem to remember in past episodes we were talking about the increased interest in doing night classes, and there was an increase in people wanting to learn German. Yeah. So there were people that, let's say adults are sort of curious about the language and start to learn it for something to do, but then they're sort of trying to inculcate children at school age as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of for something to do, but there's also an element of wanting to understand what the hell's going on. And to use it to their advantage as well. So if they can understand what's being said, they don't have to let on that they know what's being said.
In fact,
it's quite useful.
Yeah, and in fact, didn't they appeal for people to be able to teach German? It's all very well saying you need to teach children German, but you've got to have someone competent enough to do it. Yeah,
in January. So this order was 27th of January, and February, they were looking for people to teach it. So they were asking for volunteers.
So in reality, the application of this is really down to resources. It's all very well to want it to happen, and then you can ask for people to volunteer. But if you've got no one to do it, the German troops are not going to go in. The military are not going to go into the schools and do it.
No.
I wonder how effective it was in the end. I mean, I've never met anybody of my parents' generation that actually were able to speak any words of German. It must be almost willfully forgotten the moment the occupation ended. I mean, did it continue, Nick, as best as you know, right through to the occupation? Did it peter out?
I don't know, to be honest. I have met some people over the years that could speak, they could remember German.
Oh, right, okay.
Or they said they could remember it but chose not to actually not to ever use it.
Yeah.
But they could still understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
There's another interesting thing that happens on the same day in the Guernsey press, and the Germans are trying to put some spin. You've got lots of orders coming out in the paper, and they obviously think, well, we've got to have some good news in the paper. What can we do? I know. So bearing in mind, there's been an outbreak of Colorado beetle, so we've had problems with supplies of potatoes. The Germans have been nicking our supplies of potatoes in any case, or rather, borrowing, and we'll let you have them back. Yeah, right. That didn't happen very often. No. But anyway, so they thought they'd put some positive spin on the news that there were a cargo of 150 tons of French géant potatoes that had arrived from France. And this was really good news, the Germans said, because it was particularly good for frying with fish.
Oh, right.
As Ord points out, to have a chip shop and actually have something that you could do. You could go and fry your fish because they haven't got anything to fry it with.
No fat.
No. So, he's quite annoyed about it because he said, it's invaluable for fried fish shops. Well, we don't have any.
And Nick made a passing reference to Colorado beetle. This is a pernicious little beetle that can destroy potato crops, and it's even to the current day. If you find a Colorado beetle, you can take it in and get a sixpence or something. It It was a real horror. It was.
There was still a problem in the 70s. I seem to remember.
Oh yeah, I remember it being on local television about
70s, early 80s.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's pick up on some of the things some miscellaneous social comments here. I'm looking through comments made by our diarist J.C. Sovery that lived in St. Sampson's in the northern part of Guernsey. He's saying that he comments on the lack of real news in the local newspaper, apart from German propaganda. And then one of the things he sort of notices that women are using prams to pick up their shopping or fabricating carts and things. And, you do see these pictures of people going doing their shopping, and the only thing in the pram is maybe a few potatoes or something, and people are weak, and where they would have carried a shopping bag, they're using a trolley.
Yeah, well, quite often, as you say, they're using a pram because they're having to improvise, and if they've got a pram, they can obviously use that for a child, or when they're not using it for that, they can be using it to move their supplies around.
I think there is a quite a famous iconic is the word now, picture of a lady picking up her Vega parcel with a pram. Yeah. That picture has been seen millions of times now. It's in Richard Yeome's Occupation Museum, which is well worth a visit. And yeah, I mean, it's the little things that Sovery is noticing. And this is the next thing really was sort of heartbreaking, very, very poignant. He's been evicted from his home and he's quite happy in his lodgings, but he passes his home in New Street in St. Sampson's and notices in his house, a broken window patched with cardboard. And he reflects that the house that he was evicted from will probably be in a worse state when the Germans eventually leave. Now, Mr. Sovery, I think, may have passed away from cancer before the end of the occupation. I think he was one of those people that they tried to get some sort of compassionate repatriation, and he never made it. And it's possible he never, ever went to live in his house again.
And it might be just as well, to be honest.
Yeah, and I felt that was such a sad observation that he sort of writes in the diary without any form of, it was just a comment he made, and just for, I think, very, very, very sad. We mentioned about the Americans now being on stream, Nick. Reverend Ord reports what he describes as hedge hopping raid by the United States Air Force on Guernsey Airport. Was this something that you were able to?
I've not been able to turn anything up on that one at all.
No, I mean, hedge hopping suggests they were coming down really, really low,
yeah, I've not found anything on that particular day. I have had a look, but not been able to find anything. But I don't doubt him.
Okay, and
I don't doubt him at all. I mean, January 43, there was a lot of Allied aircraft involved in operations around the Channel Islands, and the Germans. We've talked about them being a bit jittery in November and December 42. Well, they accidentally shot down one of their own aircraft in Jersey. They got a bit carried away, and.
But is this not activity centred on the Channel Islands? It's activity over and around, presumably on French targets.
It's a bit of both. So there was a big raid on Lorient during January, and there were some aircraft that came on the way back and dropped bombs.
Well, this would have been presumably submarine pens, the fabrication of the submarine pens.
Yeah, I've been to the submarine pens in Lorient. They're quite impressive. But it's either returning aircraft that are coming back that haven't been able to find their target or whatever, but there are others are deliberate. They're going after shipping in the harbour here or convoys around the coast. So like in December, they're doing that. They're shooting up. If they can see Germans assembled up at Fort George or whatever, then they're attacking any sort of concentration of troops, that sort of thing. They're shooting those up.
Yeah, well, we know that there was thousands and thousands of reconnaissance or high flight photography. So what we're saying then is, at this stage in the war, there are Channel Island specific.
Oh yeah,
air activity. Mm-hmm. So it's not it's not right to consider the fact we were left alone.
No.
We really were consistently throughout the occupation. Somebody must have been planning.
Not so much in the earlier stages.
But this is ratcheting up, isn't it?
There were a couple of raids in August 1940, and then there was one in January 42.
But we're far more organised now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We've got much more, obviously ramped up aircraft production, targets.
And different types of aircraft as well have come on stream. Specialised niche aircraft.
And you've got the Americans as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, we were sort of maybe going a little bit off piste here, but I find this interesting, and you've got far more knowledge than I on the subject. Where would these raids be planned and organised? Who would be responsible for gathering the intel and deciding what to go for? Was it a joint command? I mean, how would they disseminate the information?
Well, so you talked about the reconnaissance photos. Then it's a combination of things. So you get either targets of opportunity. So somebody's coming back, having not been able to bomb the coast of France or whatever, and they decide that they're going to come and take a look over the Channel Islands, or they find themselves over the Channel Islands by accident, and they see a target and attack it, or they see something and think, hang on a minute, well, we better report this when we get back. So you get the likes of the submarine that was in the old harbour.
Yes, that's right.
Across from M&S, which later on in the war, which they came in. Now they were pretty careful, because what wasn't going to go well was if they find out subsequently that they've killed lots of local people. So we're not talking like 100 aircraft coming to bomb the island. These are a much more surgical.
Surgical. Yeah.
You're talking 3, 4, 6 aircraft, that sort of thing, of varying types depending on what stage of the war we're talking about. But I mean, they flew, and they're very conscious of the time of day as well. So that submarine attack was something like 8 o'clock in the morning, or just after 8 in the morning, because they knew there wouldn't be very many people in St. Petersburg at that time.
Oh, of course, yes.
And it was just as flipping well, because the submarine had gone, but they still bombed.
Right, okay.
Or it certainly had moved from the old harbour anyway. They attempted to bomb it. They dropped a bomb in the old harbour. Job done. The bomb's in the old harbour in the right place, but unfortunately blew out all of the glass,
all of the windows,
all the glass all the way along the seafront there, including some of the glass at the town church. So, but that we'll talk about that when we get nearer to that point. So there was lots of this going on. It was planned to just harass them, but a lot of it was attacking shipping that's going between the islands and France, or just inter-island. So.
And of course, we should remember that the Kriegsmarine, or all of German radio activity, was going out coded. And of course, the Allies were advanced in terms of being able to decipher this through the Enigma machine. They cracked the code. So there'd have been presumably somewhere like Bletchley Park or elsewhere that would have been concentrating on traffic coming out of radio traffic coming out of the Channel Islands, Nick?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Probably not quite yet. Potentially, maybe you probably need to be talking 6 months hence. Probably mid 43, late 4.
What, in terms of cracking the?
No, in terms of listening to the broadcast from here.
Okay, yeah,
I think so, because you're really talking when the German Naval Signals Headquarters comes online.
Yeah, but they were operating in the Colonet as well.
Oh, yeah, they were. Yeah, but they didn't have their whacking great radio mast that they put up.
Okay, so really, once the signals bunker, which of course I looked after, came on stream, and that came on stream February 1944.
Yeah.
So it was then they had a gretter capability.
Yeah. I mean, they were listening to what the Germans were broadcasting, because they were picking it up amongst all the other stuff that they were listening to. But that radio transmitter was the only one in the Channel Islands that I'm aware of that could broadcast straight back to Berlin. So it was therefore broadcasting a very strong signal and very, very easy to be listened to in England. So yeah, that's clearly going to be that. I mean, you were talking about having to use carts and things to get around, but again, there's numerous accounts about people looking very threadbare. We'll perhaps come on to some of that to do with some of the public buildings and things probably in the next episode. But and again, we've got the prices determination order comes in at this point because the Germans had just decided quite why it took them until January 43, because they made noises about this much, much earlier and were getting quite stroppy about it. And the civilian government were wanting to control stuff as well, because things were just getting out of hand with pricing on any kind of goods that you might want. It was very, very difficult. It was particularly anything that was difficult to get hold of. We've talked about the bartering. We've talked about the auctions where they're having really minor things like boxes and matches are being auctioned.
Yeah.
So they've bought in that, and Lesotho is over in Jersey.
And was it synchronised across both islands at the same time?
No. And he's really surprised because he's surprised that they haven't done it before. It was slightly earlier in Jersey, and he's like, well, given how obsessed they were with controlling everything, usually so hot on that sort of stuff. Why didn't they do something about it? Who knows why it took them until that point? But then this is when there's a whole load of stuff like you can't use the French franc after they give a very short time frame. I think it's about a week for you to go and take your French francs to the bank. That's sometime in January 43, early February. I can't remember off the top of my head.
So also, is this an attempt to sort of combat the black market?
Yeah, man, that's the whole thing is, and there's all sorts going on with the black market at this point. I mean, we've talked about the black market before. Some people had a good Christmas because some pigs died.
Go on.
Natural causes, obviously. There's a whole load of people that end up in court in January because they've been caught for slaughtering pigs. There's loads of them. I picked out a couple of cases, but it's just absolutely bonkers.
So these are secret pigs.
Well, no, some of them aren't secret, and some of them. There's one guy gets caught, and he's like, well, I just haven't. We talked about one in December who was like, oh, well, I've just not had time to report the fact. And that there are various people, both in Jersey and Guernsey, who talk about how it was very fortunate that a pig lay down and died
just at the right time,
just before Christmas, or just after Christmas. So they're getting into trouble. There's a guy out at in Les Forgettes in Catal. He's charged with permitting the slaughter of livestock, to wit, a pig, between the 10th and 12th of January. So the guy can be exactly sure when he did it, and basically he then took that out of the food supply. So that this is not only annoying the civilian government, this is annoying the Germans as well. But he's taking a whole pig out of the food supply, out of the rationing system, and he said, oh well, I had 2 pigs and one had a broken leg, and I had to kill it, and I had intended.
One was a bit depressed.
I had intended to report it, but I hadn't got around to it, and he tried to pass off the second pig as being the pig that, when they came round to inspect, it's a bit like the milk we talked about. There were people getting into trouble for.
It sounds a little bit hello to me.
Yeah,
well.
And of course, and they were supposed to cut the pig in half and give half to the Germans as well, which didn't happen. But they had a tip off and they found half a pig. And the excuses of things like a broken leg, badly sprained, that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a few court cases kicking about for that. So the black market was still, because they'll have sold stuff off as well. And there are cases in January of people getting done for selling stuff. The price controls have just come in, and they're already breaking them. One other thing I found, which I thought was quite an interesting, perhaps a little bit more cheerful thing, was when I was looking at refugee news, and I've heard about this sort of thing before, because you remember my friend Kerry that come over from Wales before, and we've I found a reference to there being an art display there for refugee children had been put on in Swansea, not that far from where he lives. And I found that one a while ago, but this is actually a display in London. There's actually in New Bond Street in the Cooling Gallery, they had a special collection of The War as Children See It. And there's a rather, I'll put this on our social media. There's a rather splendid drawing by T.N. Mitchell, a 14-year-old evacuee from Guernsey, and I think it's pretty good. I mean, he's got lots going on in that photo. There's all sorts of aircraft, and some of them actually look pretty accurate, because that looks to me in the distance like a walrus, and I'm not quite sure what that. Well, that's a German one there. That could be a Ju-87 there. That's probably a Heinkel in the foreground. There's a dive bombery thing going on in the background, which is probably the Ju-87. We've got a civilian ship there, or perhaps a troop ship, and then we've got a battleship that's opening fire on the Germans.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on in that picture, but there's a couple of pictures that are reproduced, and it was organised by Lady Clark, wife of the director of the National Gallery, The War as Seen by Children, and they had a whole load of people
Kenneth Clark's wife,
yeah, and organised by the Civil Defence Artists and the Refugee Children's Evacuation Fund, and the collection will tour the United States at the close of a London View. So bit of recognition there, but I think that's a pretty cool picture. That.
Yeah. Okay, you're going to put that out there.
Yeah, I'll put it on our social media.
Yeah. Now we're getting towards the end of this first episode, but we having mentioned sort of military things. This destroyer Sherbrooke that Violet Carey mentions.
Yeah, this is quite interesting. So Loftus Jones. Now, Loftus Jones, there's quite a few of them. So there's Commander Loftus Jones, who escapes at the start of the occupation on a rather fine boat called the Carlotta. He escapes and goes off on a little bit of a tour around England, Ireland, the Isle of Man, and whatever, before he finally hoves port in the UK on a permanent basis. And this is, I believe, his son, I think. But there's several Loftus Joneses, all about the same age, with just different middle names.
Yeah.
So it can be a bit confusing, but they talk about this destroyer getting into a bit of a punch up, and they were the target of these German battleships. So I will put this out on our social media so people can have a read of it rather than reading it out now. But it's quite a good account of what went on in terms of protecting a convoy, and they had a fairly tough time of it by all accounts. Boiler room flooding badly and men being killed, etc. But it's an interesting account of that engagement, so I will put that out on our social media.
Excuse me. Okay. Now we've got quite a little, as we near the end of the episode. There's quite a lot going on. Where are we? Are you able to talk about the final stages of your book?
It's with the publishers and imminent. That's all I can say at the moment. So
okay,
but they're just going through the process at the moment.
Yeah,
it just takes a wee while to get it actually into print.
Now you'll be talking at the We Have Ways Festival.
I am indeed
in September. Just for new listeners, can you just give them a little bit of background as to exactly what We Have Ways is?
Yeah, sure. It's organised by Al Murray and James Holland. So Al Murray of pub landlord fame, but he's also a historian as well. He's written loads of books. And James Holland, who's written loads of history.
And this spun out of COVID, and it's become really quite something now.
Yeah,
hasn't
absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely massive. There'll be about 5,000 people there if they sell out.
Which I'm sure they will.
There's all sorts going on. There's lots and lots of speakers, loads of really well-known historians and stuff.
So it's like a festival. It's like a literary festival. Yeah. It's a sort of...
But with tanks.
Of course.
With tanks and fly pasts.
And silly shirts.
And all sorts going on, yeah.
But just sort of deconstructing it, if people want to sort of ease their way into We Have Ways, there's a podcast.
Yep. We Have Ways for Making You Talk.
A website or anything like that? Or mainly it's
So there's the podcast, but there is, if you Google We Have Ways Festival, that will take you to
everything you need to know.
Yeah, absolutely everything you need to know. So yeah, I'm talking on the Friday at lunchtime, so I get mine out of the way quickly.
Yeah, and you were talking about your book.
I'm talking about Escapes. Yeah, Escapes on the Channel Islands. So yeah, and anybody that is coming along will be relieved to know that my slides solely consist of photographs that are relevant to the stories. I'm not going to give you death by PowerPoint. It's going to anything that appears on the screen is going to be a photo from the time, explaining who somebody was or where they got away from or how they got away.
Now, when you talk to people about military interest, this sort of phrase, we have ways, gets sort of thrown out there. And so people should maybe acquaint themselves with that. I think I mentioned before, I was in Jersey last weekend with the Channel Island Occupation Society Guernsey branch, where we were hosted by the Jersey branch. We had a wonderful itinerary. We went out to Corbière Bunker Complex and had a look around there and lots of other things, and issued an invitation to the Jersey branch to visit us here in Guernsey. The Channel Island Occupation Society, it's well worth looking up. Google that. Overseas members are welcome. So we know a lot of you that listen to this podcast are all over the world, but it's well worth keeping a track of the branch activities of the Channel Island Occupation Society, both in here and Jersey. So if you are planning to visit the Channel Islands, you can get hold of Nick and I at occupied@gnetradio.com. We're both qualified tour guides. It would be lovely to show people around, Nick, and also point them in touch, getting them in touch with the right people in Jersey as well.
Absolutely. Or up in Alderney as well.
Yeah, yes, of course, Alderney. Have you got any tours coming up with Joe?
Yep, we've got one coming up in September. We're doing one around the Bordeaux area of Guernsey, which is dealing with some of the escapes, but also dealing with people getting locked up and dealing with some of the fortifications. I'll stick a link to that in the show notes, so anybody can go and find that. We've also I stuck an edit in. I don't know if I told you, but when I edited the second part of December 42, we'd just heard that we were going to the Imperial War Museum to do podcast live.
Yeah, so that's me and you.
Yeah, we're going as they've got the Imperial War Museum in London have a podcast live festival. So we're going along to do that. So you can come along and watch us record an episode. There are loads of other podcasters going as well. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. I mean, Paul Bavil's going to be there from History Rage. There's too many to mention. I'll put a link so people can go and take a look. But it's going to be a great day out. It's 1st of November, and as I say, there's going to be a lot going on. So you can go and see various podcasts being recorded. You can go on some organised tours. There's going to be a panel session at some point as well with the podcasters, and then there's some sort of other event going on later on, which I've only had very sketchy details of at the moment. I think it's a bit of a secret, so I can't really say any more of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's anybody that sort of attends is going to be interested in history by definition, but of course it might inspire people to get podcasts up and running. I mean, we sort of had a chat and we got up and running, and I think we're doing quite well. We get some good stats, and it's raised awareness of the occupation of the Channel Islands. Yeah. I'm. If you search for my website, Keith. Well, I'm Guernsey Walking Tours. There's lots of content on there, and from October, should be doing a series of illustrated talks at the St Martin's Community Centre. There shall be details on the website, and you can always get hold of me at occupied@Gnet Radio, and get hold of both of us on that email address to see what we're up to individually and collectively. And I think we'll just set up now to say this is episode 1 of January 1943. A lot of content in episode 2, Nick.
Yep.
The deportations and the rumours of deportations.
There's loads of rumours going around. Then we find out about some deportations. Yeah. There's some absolute shockers as to people that the Germans trying to deport. There's also the attitude of some of the Germans towards the deportations.
Didn't win themselves any friends, did they?
Well, no, but there were some of them that were acutely aware of that as well. and there was a lot of application of it's come from a higher command or a higher order gets deployed quite a bit during that. But it's a real insight into how some of the German commanders felt about it, how the civilian population felt about it, how some of the negotiating around who actually ended up going. It was, there was a lot of horse trading, shall we say, or attempts at horse trading to try and, some people were volunteering to go instead of other people.
Yeah.
Particularly instead of elderly people. We touched on that in the previous round of them as well, but that was going on. There were representations made because, you can't deport absolutely everybody pretty much who does one particular role in the island because the island can't function.
No, that's exactly.
Unfortunately, the rules says you're going to do that. So there's quite. It's a real insight into what goes on. It's a real shame that von Alfweiss's diary doesn't come on till later because he does feature in these negotiations.
And I was going to reach for it literally, and then I thought, no, he's later in the year.
He's later on. Yeah, he's later on.
Well, that's not the only content in our second episode of January 1943, and I think we're going to put it out at a week's sort of rotation as opposed to the usual fortnight.
Yeah, we'll stick it out on the next one. So what are we? That'll be the 1st of September.
Okay, because we're acutely aware that we want to do December 1943 in December 2025, aren't we?
Yep.
Okay.
So we're probably going to end up with some episodes every week because
Yeah,
we've got lots of ideas. We've had people get in touch with us about various things as well. So
okay, right. I think we just say goodbye for the moment and see people very, very soon.
Indeed. Cheerio.
Yeah, that's bye from Keith and Nick. Bye-bye.
He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone. It's 5 to 7. All his friends and family had gone. Left on a ship 'cause they knew